Hi guys. All right, so I want to talk about a little bit about glazing. I know you guys didn't get a chance to be in the studio to see it up close, so I wanted to make sure that you guys at least get like some basic about glazing. Okay, so right now over here you can see like two different clay bodies. This is like a darker brown, and this is like a pretty much like the same clay that we are using in the class. Um, as you can see, the colors are different in each of these. That's because of the clay body. The darker the clay body, it will the more likely to affect the glaze when you covered with a glaze, depending on like what kind of glaze it is. And with the lighter color, the color usually like stay true to itself. All right, so these are cone 10 glazes, and you can also see we have some oxides put on them. So this is on there, so that means that you put the oxides first and then you put the glaze over it. This one, you have the glaze first and the oxides go over. You can do those things, and we talked about oxide in the class, that they're pretty much colorants that we use in ceramics. They're material dug from the ground, or they're not man-made. They're pretty much nature like colors that were given to us. All right. This is sort of like a clear glaze right now, you can see. And if you want more detail on like when you put oxides underneath, or if you have sort of like you can see over here, if you have texture or something you want it to show more, you want to definitely use a celadon base or clear glaze, and or glazes that sort of like show that texture. So you can see this is called vinegar yellow, and you can look at it and you can see sort of like that texture sort of showing through, unlike a color such as, let me see, this color, you can see the texture is not showing. So if you use a glaze over texture that is going to cover, then that defies the purpose. So you want to make sure that you want to use a glaze that show that texture that you're having. All right, so I have two pieces over here that I want to show you for glazing. And here's another piece over here. This is a planter. Before you want to glaze anything, you want to make sure that you have like a damp sponge, and you want to wipe off the dust from the piece. Because if you have any dust on it, imagine like you're putting like the glaze on it, and the glaze doesn't want to adhere to the places that the dust is, and eventually it starts crawling during the firing. So you want to make sure that you clean the dust, make sure it's not too wet, because then you're filling up all the pores in here, and that way the glaze will have a hard time to adhere to this. Okay, so I have two glazes that I chose over here, and I'm going to use these two glazes to glaze those pieces. And I'm going to use a whisk. Before you want to use any glazes, you want to make sure that you stir the glaze, because what's going on is that all the water is up on top and the material is right at the bottom of this. So you want to make sure that you mix it up pretty good until it is a right consistency and like all the water mixed up with the material. I'm going to mix up the glaze. So all you have to do is just glaze has been like sitting for a while, so it has like a lot of material at the bottom that is settled, but you can see it's mixed up pretty good for the most part. And let me show you another example of the glaze, what it looks like when you don't mix it. So it's just water. So you want to make sure that you definitely mix up all the time. You want to make sure to either wash the whisk that you've used and then use it on the other glaze, or you want to grab another whisk that is clean and then mix the other one. If you accidentally take this out and put it in the other glaze, what you're doing is you're contaminating this other glaze, and you have to remix the glaze. We have to toss that glaze out completely because like it's not going to work the same as it was before. So I'm going to mix this one as well. Make sure you're really in there and like you're mixing pretty good. A lot of times I see people just do this. This is not going to mix it. You want to go in really stir it. Alright, that's done. And after you're done, you want to make sure you wash all the tools that you're using and you're putting them back where they are. So after you're done mixing the glazes, you want to make sure that you wash the whisks and put them away where they belong to. Each studio has a different setting. This studio is different than what we have at GCC. So you want to make sure that you put the whisk on the place that they belong to. Don't leave them in the buckets. Don't leave them just on the table dirty. You want to make sure that you clean them up. So there are different ways to glaze pieces. There are different techniques. So right now I'm going to glaze this piece right here, and I can either dip the whole thing in, or I can do the inside first and outside later. If I do the inside first, outside later, one of the advantages to this is that like I can do the inside different color and the outside different color. So I'm going to show you like the inside first and then outside, and then I'll show you another piece that you dip the whole piece inside the glaze. So the way you want it, especially like pieces like this, vessels or like other things that have like a more narrow top, it's better to do the inside first, okay? Another way like sometimes people do is like they do this half one color and they go to another glaze, they do the other half. So there are like so many ways to do it, and you will eventually learn all of it as you get the experience in the studio. So what I'm going to do, I have the glaze in here. I'm going to pour it inside here. Once it's poured inside, I'm going to slowly pour the glaze out. I'm not gonna even worry about like the glaze that is on top right now. It drips over sometimes, so that's okay. You can either like touch it up or do something. Now you can see like I glaze inside. The glaze is sort of like a light color, so you can't really see it. But it also feels like the glaze is a little bit on the thin side, so I'm going to do this again. You have to let it dry, get dry first though, if you want to dip it the second time. All right, so that's about good. Now I want to glaze the outside of this. How do I do this so it's not getting inside of here? You can do it, push it this way inside the glaze, or you can hold it this way and then push it in so that glaze doesn't go inside. Bring it out. The rule is like about 2 to 3 seconds depending on the glaze too. a lot of people, what they do is like they go inside there and they start counting. They go like 1, 2. Don't do that, because the more you hold it, the more glaze you get on your piece, and it will be thicker, and it will eventually run inside the kiln when it gets to the higher temperature. So you don't want to do that. The thickness of the glaze, usually the best is to have it at thickness of a credit card. Okay, so we dip the bottom inside the other glaze. But you can see there's some bisque area that are showing it still, and the glaze haven't meet up on that spot. So what I can do when this happens, I usually like to have like the top glaze to lay over the bottom glaze so it doesn't look weird. The overlapping shows when you're you fire your pieces. Depends on like also like what kind of glaze it is, and if it's not runny, it definitely stays that way. So I rather have the top glaze to come over the bottom glaze. Okay, so what I do is I'll hold it this way and dip it once to the glaze that I put on the inside. And remember I said that glaze was a little bit on the thin side, so I'm gonna wait a little bit until it dries. Once it dries, I will dip it again in there. So let's say it's just dried out. All right, you can see how it looks. We finished glazing this piece right now. It looks pretty good. One thing, I have glaze at the bottom over here. So what do I do with that? I cannot just put the piece inside the kiln with glaze at the bottom, because it will get stuck onto the shelves or the cookie that you're going to use. So what you need to do, grab a sponge and you need to wipe that glaze off the bottom. As you can see, it comes off pretty easy. So I'm going to wet the sponge again. You might need to have like a little bit more water in this sponge. When you're wiping off the glaze, it will come out a lot easier. You can see. All right. And on the side of this, you want to give at least about 1/4 of an inch. You just need a little bit of gutter at the bottom over here. So in case if the glaze runs down a little bit, you have room for the glaze to go down further. So if I just leave it like this, I'm holding my hand weird. All right. So if I just leave it like this, there's no room for the glaze to run down. So what happens is when the glaze runs a little bit, it's gonna get stuck onto my cookie. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just take a little bit off the bottom all around. So you will do that. You can use the sponge to do that. Okay. It's pretty all right. It's pretty good. All right. Okay. Another way to make sure that you don't have glaze at the bottom and like avoid like all this white paint is to use wax resist. And wax resist is a material that pretty much wax. And what you do is that you brush it onto the bottom of your piece, and then some people like to draw a line and then put the wax before that line so they have like a perfect line. But you can also just like freehand it and put the wax over here. And when you dip it, you have to wait a little bit until the wax is completely dried. And when you dip your piece, this area that has the wax will not get glaze. All right, I'll show you guys a little bit video of that as well, so you have like an idea of like what wax is. But a lot of times what people make the mistake of, they think if the wax will stop the glaze. That's not the case. The wax, during the firing, I mean, the wax burns out in high temperature. So the only reason we put the wax is to temporarily stop the glaze, all right? But if you have glaze at the bottom and you put wax over it, there's no point, because once it goes into firing, that wax will melt off, and what you end up with the glaze, and that glaze will get stuck onto your pieces. So keep that in mind. A lot of people like make that mistake, and sometimes when people dip their pieces with the wax on, you get little tiny drops of glaze onto the wax. It doesn't completely come off, but it's less glaze on there. Some people don't clean that glaze off, so they have like these little drops of glaze on their piece, and then they put it on their cookie. Then the cookie doesn't come off because the glaze melted into their cookie and fused the two pieces together. So make sure that if you see the little drops of glaze on your wax resist, you wipe it off, okay? So the next step is using a cookie. What it does, it protects the shelves, the kiln shelves, from melted glaze onto them. So when you put your pieces on here, if for some reason the glaze is too thick, the kiln gets hot, or whatever the reason is, if the glaze runs down, it will run onto your cookie, all right, on the edge of the cookie. So that way you're protecting the shelf. But to make it easy for people to pick up the pieces, because like if you just put it like this, everyone picks it up, is like, oh, it comes off. So it's harder to manage. But the best way is you use glue. All right, this glue is very old. Let's see if I can like make it come out of here. It's a challenge. Don't get it done. Nope. All right, it's almost there. All right. Here's a cookie. All right. So I'm going to just like dab a little bit of this glue over here. You don't need much. That's enough. Sometimes people just like pour in the whole bottle on here, and that's just not good. So what you do, you just put your piece on here, you put it on the side and let it dry. Once it's dried out, you can easily pick it up and the cookie doesn't fall out. I'm gonna put that aside. So the next step is using the cookie. Back to the second piece. Now we want to dip the whole piece inside the glaze. So this glaze has been sitting for a while, so I need to remix it. I have one whisk over here. So give me 1 second. Let me clean off the whisk really quick. All right. Okay, let's go back there. Okay. Also, bear with me. This is my first time like doing demo on while recording, so I don't have the right equipment. I just have my phone with me, so it will do. All right, so I washed the whisk, and also make sure that like if you have another bucket of glaze that the lid is open, you want they're like next to each other too close, you usually want to make sure that you close the lid on the other one, because like if splashes from this also goes into this other bucket, it could contaminate it. So I'm going to mix it. going to put the whisk away. Make sure you wash it as soon as you're done. All right, so there are ways that you can dip this in there. The only way for me to dip this, it's either go half and then the other half, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tongue. So this device, it's a little scary to use it at first, but then once you get used to it, it's very easy actually. It's just grabs the piece like this. You just want to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure on this side, because if you do, you're gonna crunch the other side. Not crunch, you're gonna break the other side. All right, so I'm holding it and I'm going to go inside here. Let me see how I can hold it so you guys can see. All right, 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay. Let's put it on a surface or on a table. Take the tongue off of it. Okay. Sometimes the tongue could leave some little marks on there. If that happens, you can just dab your finger into the glaze and just do a little touch up over here. All right. You can do that. Or you can just brush it on. Now what I need to do after is to wipe the bottom. So we're done glazing this piece. You guys saw that there was like a hole in the middle of this. Make sure if you have holes like this, especially if you have vent holes for if your piece is closed form, you want to make sure that if there's glaze in there, you want to poke that out. Use your needle tool, you poke it out, and for the pieces that are hollow on the inside and you have a vent hole, you want to make sure that you poke that vent hole again, because what happens is like that can, like, as it goes to cone 10, the piece starts shrinking again. There's no place for the air to escape, and that can cause the piece to explode in the kiln. Okay, so you want to make sure that you take care of that. Okay, now I'm going to damp up my sponge. All right, and wipe the little tiny feet. All right, so a piece like this, you don't have to wipe the bottom over here, because you can see there's like a little space in between from like the bottom or the base of the piece to the feet. So you can just like wipe the bottom of the feet and make sure you have enough space for the glaze to move down. Okay, so this is pretty good. Again, you don't have to wipe the base. Just need to wipe the area that touches the ground, okay? And one way to check that is to put your piece on the ground or on a surface, and you see which area is touching the surface. You want to make sure that your pieces are all bisqued before glazing them, okay? If they don't break during the glazing, when you're glazing them, they will definitely break inside the kiln, and it's not pretty, because what happens is when they explode, they're going to affect everything around them, and everything else will get little pieces of your piece in there. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about oxides as well. And oxides, as we talked before, they're like material that are found in earth, and they go to a factory, then they grind it down, and they've sent to us to use in our ceramic. You just have to mix them in water, or you use them either like in different glazes, or if you want to use them as sort of like a stain, you can just mix it with water and use it. So right now I have, this one is called cobalt carbonate, and mixed with water. You have to make sure that you stir it pretty good, because they're metal base. So what happens is that they go down and settle at the bottom quite faster than the actual glaze that we have. So you want to make sure that you mix it pretty good. And I'm just gonna shake it. Make sure if you are shaking it, like the lid is pretty close so you're not splattering anywhere else. These oxides are harder to clean off from your pieces, so even like a tiny bit of it get in your hand and you put your hand on it and then put that on your piece will have that color. So you want to work pretty clean. Okay, so here's a little textiles I have. It has a little fish. One way you can do is you brush on the oxide into the area that you have a texture like this. All right. And then you can wipe the rest of it, but what happens is that the rest of the oxide is gonna stay inside that texture. Okay. Another way to use the oxide is to just like on plain surface. I got some black on my hand from I don't know where. Okay. Just like on a plain surface, you can do drawings, you can just do simple lines, whatever you prefer. All right. You can play around with sort of like the value of like the color. If you have more oxide in there, the color will like turn darker. If you have less oxide, so and like dilute the stain with water a little bit more, then you get lighter color. So that way you can do sort of like a shading, like drawings that you like watercolor sort of. So you can do that as well. All right, so here's on plain surface, here's on a texture. I also brought in some wax so you can also see what wax is. So this is wax. Always read the label when you're using something, especially if it doesn't have labels anywhere. If you don't know what it is, ask someone to help you. Open it up. On the side that I don't have any oxide, I'm going to put some wax on there. I'm going to just like do a little design. All right. Little dots. Okay, so that's wax. Make sure whenever you use wax resist, you want to wash the brush with warm water right after you use it. If you leave it, it's gonna harden up, and it's after that it's so hard to get rid of that wax and it will ruin your brush. So it's always good to have like also cheap brushes in handy. So in case if it gets like wax on it, you can clean it easier and you're not going to be like using like a brush that is like $20 for a wax and then ruin your brush eventually. Or just have one brush that is just like you're using for wax. Okay, all right, let's glaze this little textiles that I have in my hand. I'm going to mix another glaze, probably like a transparent glaze, because like I talked to you, like I said before, when you have sort of like a texture, you want to use a glaze that shows that texture. So either a transparent glaze or a solid glaze, they're all very good to do that. And since I have the oxide, I like to use something that will have that oxide show more. Okay, I'll come back a little. Next up, clear glaze over here. And I have the textile with the wax on here, so I'm going to dip this in. I'm going to show you the side that I have the wax, so I want to make sure that you guys see how wax work. All right. You see how it came off, and like you see those little tiny drops on the area that I have the wax. If you have, this happens if you have wax at the bottom of your pieces. If this happens, you want to make sure that you get rid of those little tiny dots. All right. Seems like the glaze is a little bit on the thin side, so I'm going to dip it one more time. It dried already. Just one more time. Give it a little shake. All done.